All right. Hi, Scott. Hi, Bassem. Hi, Ghassan. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com to discuss, the outbreak and civil war going on in Syria. Um, it's a pleasure to have each of you. I just wanted to go over a few quick things before we begin. And the first is just so you know, right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the discussion is completed, I'm going to be posting this conversation to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with each of you, Scott, Bassem, and Ghassan?
Yep. Yes.
All right, great.
Yeah, it's fine.
Great. And the only other thing that I just wanted to add is that here at Vonvo we're trying to have our discussion stay civil and organized and valuable. So we don't want there to be any personal attacks on anyone, no belittling. Is everyone fine with those rules and can obey them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, agreed.
All right, great. So why don't then we just start off and ease our way into it? Can we each get a background just about yourself? If you don't want to include your location, that's fine. But just for our viewers and people watching, Scott, could you give a quick background about yourself, and then we'll go Bassem and then Ghassan?
Yeah, I worked at a couple think tanks. I did my undergraduate and master's in political science, international relations, and my focus had always been Middle East, and now it's drifting more towards East Asia. But those are my two focuses of concern.
Great.
Regional focuses of concern.
Bassem, could you give our viewers a background of yourself?
First, my name is Bassem, and no, it's me. It's Bassem. Bassem or Hassan? Which one?
Bassem.
Yeah. So I'm a psychology graduate. I don't work in the field. My main career, if you want, is more in the music industry, especially heavy metal and hard rock music. I'm a singer and a composer, and I'm so much into politics because the country is extremely political in the sense of whatever is going on around. So that's about it.
All right, great. And Ghassan.
Look, sorry, but you've got to get the pronunciation right. My name is Ghassan or Ghassan and Bassem. Bassem Ghassan, because it does sound a little bit similar the way you pronounce them.
All right.
Well, I'm from Lebanon. I'm not into politics as in the field of study or anything like that. In fact, I'm a science graduate. Politics has been, I wouldn't say my passion, but it's something that I have to live with, having lived through the civil war in Lebanon and all the things that followed. And in a region that's rich, sadly, with tumultuous events, you have to acquaint yourself with the situation and make a stand sometimes. And that's the reason why I'm here.
Great. So I guess the next quick question to ask each of you, just easing our way into it, is there any particular event or something which got you very passionate about this topic in particular, Syria? Scott, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Well, just the geopolitical significance of the whole Levant region is of inherent concern to me. Syria being the linchpin, specifically with respect to Iran's hand in the Levant region, is basically the impetus for my general concern. And specifically, as the Arab awakening as quote unquote has occurred, I've honed my focus more and more towards Syria and the other Arab countries and North African countries who have, experienced political insurrections.
Great. Bassem, how about yourself?
when it comes to the Syrian crisis right now, I mean, Syria is, I mean, it's our neighbor, and we haven't been really on good terms most of the time. Whatever happens in Syria affects Lebanon as much as whatever happens in Israel affects Lebanon. And so it is of a great concern, I think, to any Lebanese what is going on in Syria. Especially that in Lebanon, there is two major camps that reflect, or if you want, that take a stand similar to the two different camps in Syria. More than that, there are many other people in Lebanon who have a third opinion, if you want, and these people are rarely ever represented. So yeah, this is what this is how I see the perspective, because whatever happens in Syria will affect Lebanon.
Great.
It always has.
Right. And lastly, Ghassan.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with both Scott and Bassem, but I see things a little bit slightly different. I see that Syria is the last bastion standing that is both secular, totally secular, and also totally opposed to the plans of the Israeli-NATO hegemony in the region. And that's what the whole idea is about. The conspiracy, if we can put it that way, and it's nothing short of a conspiracy, is to try to crumble down Syria, to subdivide it, and to turn it into a sectarian state, or a number of states, of fact, which will not only weaken it, but it will also secure security for Israel, with which the United States is just absolutely obsessed. But
Max, can I just address that point briefly?
Yeah, let Ghassan finish.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, let Ghassan finish.
My fault.
And that obsession with security is really very short-sighted, because the way it has been planned and orchestrated, the people who are likely to replace Bashar Assad, if he does get replaced, and I don't believe that he will be, are going to, number one, turn against one another, and number two, they are going to turn back and bite the hand that fed them in the first place. And like Bassem rightly said, whatever happens in Syria affects Lebanon and vice versa. The whole of the Levant is connected, and historically Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, they're all really one part of the world that's called Syria, which was subdivided later on politically. So when we say that what happens in Syria affects Lebanon and vice versa, it's really an understatement, because they are in reality the same country. So I'm very, very interested in this subject, because it's not a mild issue. It's a very basic one.
Right. So Scott, you said something. You wanted to respond to something. Go right ahead.
Well, just with respect to, I'm not going to touch the NATO, Israel, U.S. hegemony aspect of it, because I take a longer view in the sense that I don't believe the West necessarily wants the balkanization of Syria, breaking down the country along factionalized lines. But what I believe is, as history has shown, and when the French left in 46, and the Ba'ath Party took over, the French left the country factionalized itself along sectarian lines. And I believe what has occurred over time, which hasn't been helped by foreign interventions by whomever you'd like to blame, has become this insurrection has naturally arose from the balkanization that occurred after the 1946 French Mandate, and less so in the sense that there is a current plot by Western nations to overthrow Assad, because indeed I think a total victory by either the rebels or al-Assad would be a disaster. Sorry about that. I think that a negotiated ceasefire and some sort of arrangement by which Assad would be given safe haven somewhere else is truly the only way to bring an end to this. Because, as Ghassan said, I agree. I don't see an end to this in sight without some sort of very unsatisfying but necessary concessions by essentially everyone. But in the end, I believe Israel perhaps does and the United States and the West does prefer the devil they know in Assad, but at the same time want him to fall. And this contradiction has led to inaction.
Right. Bassem or Ghassan, do either of you have a response to that?
Unless Bassem wants to have a go because he hasn't yet, I do have a reply, yes.
Yeah, of course, I do have. Actually, first to clarify something, yeah. After the mandate ended, it wasn't the Baas who took over right away. Okay, there were a series of people who came to power and then were overthrown by a series of d'etat that happened. And in Lebanon, we had a say that you would sleep one day with a regime and wake up the next day having a new regime in Syria. Until the Baas came, and the reason why, I believe personally, the reason why the Baas was so such a police state is because of the fact that it was not possible to have a stable regime without having a police state. And this led to the reason why the regime has held it on for so long. Now, concerning the whole thing, my point of view is really more about options rather than what is right and what is wrong.
Right.
So in my opinion, I do agree with Ghassan about the fact that this is the last secular that existed in the Arab world, and I do agree that there is a sort of a plot because there is a need to have a war in the Middle East going on all the time. Now this is where I probably differ with Ghassan, is that why the war is always there? The war is always there because it's if you want a Western need, an economical need.
And just to clarify, the bad part is doing right.
So this is partly what I have right now in my mind.
Can I add something here?
Yeah, go ahead, Ghassan.
Look, I again agree with most of the things that Bassem said, and I thank you, Bassem, for explaining this period of history of political instability in Syria up till the mid-60s or so. But I just want to touch on a point that Scott has raised about the removal of Bashar or anything of that sort. And I'm also glad that this was raised because the issue, as seen by the wider global community, seems to circle about that person, Bashar al-Assad. But it's not about Bashar. Whether he comes or goes, or God forbid, gets assassinated,
yeah, I agree.
Anything of that sort, nothing is going to change, because what is happening now, the way it is seen in Syria by people who are really patriotic, the patriotic Syrians, see that there is a global conspiracy that has been financed by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, pushed and promoted by Turkey, NATO, and Israel, Britain, France, you name it. I mean, this is a conspiracy of humongous magnitude. And Bashar, if anything, he has turned into a symbol of resilience to his people. And this last speech he gave is the speech of a victor, of a man of power, talking with confidence, dictating terms. He has been able to withstand this amazing, vicious attack that's coming from all different angles. And Lebanon has been Syria's Achilles heel, because this is where most of the militants and the arms get smuggled into Syria. And I personally know a lot of Syrians who were initially totally pro-reform, because when this whole thing started, it was, as we know, a reaction perhaps to the so-called Arab Spring, and people were going on the streets asking for freedom, political plurality, and things of that nature. And this has all been replaced by calls of jihadis. So this whole thing is no longer a struggle for freedom or liberation or anything of that sort, or democracy. So it's not about the person of Bashar al-Assad. It's not about him at all.
I'd like to address
Syrians
that.
feel they are under attack by the rest of the world, and they want to defend their dignity. They want to stand up and be free. That's what it's about. It's no longer about Bashar.
Yeah, Scott, go ahead and respond to what's been brought up here.
To that point, now when I say Assad, I'm speaking generally about the ruling class of Syria. But I think it could be put very simply. Assad's speech very recently his chest-thumping speech was one of confidence, and it's because the four pillars that sustain the al-Assad regime are intact. The power in the hands of the al-Assad clan and his closest cadres. Alawite unity has more or less been kept intact. The 12% of the population that are of his offshoot Shiite sect. But more importantly, the Alawite control over the military intelligence apparatus and the Ba'ath Party itself's monopoly on the political system. None of these four pillars have been successfully challenged by the rebels, nor do I believe that they lack the know-how or the material capability to challenge effectively these pillars, in which case we are in for a long slog and things will only continue to get worse. And I agree. We can all argue to the extent to which this is a Western conspiracy to overthrow the only secular regime in the Arab world, particularly one that is an ally of Syria, an ally of Iran, and an ally of Russia. That I'm happy to leave to those who are on the ground and know more than me. The point is, I believe the countries around are doing what they can and can in their interest, because it's become a Sunni-Shiite conflict in the region, and in general, I don't believe that it will be successful, but at the end of the day, I don't see this as a monolithic, it's all about Bashar al-Assad. I see this as the Ba'ath Party and its group of what the Ba'ath Party has done in its 40 years of reign, which is unleash all the minority groups against one another, divide and conquer, and to keep itself in order to keep its power consolidated. And that therein lies the problem. That's why, that on top of the fact that the regime's military has maintained its unity for the most part, is why there's such a problem and why there's so little appetite for intervention, irrespective of whom would be intervening.
Well, so
can I jump the queue here, perhaps, Max, and give Scott a response, if that's possible?
Yeah, go ahead.
With your permission, Bassem, is that okay with you? Okay. Well, first of all,
you have to repeat that.
I see that there is a sectarian conflict in Syria. I have lived through a sectarian civil war in Lebanon, when both sides of the political divide or the military divide were committing similar atrocities. Militant Christians were killing Muslims, and militant Muslims were killing Christians. But in Syria, this is not the way at all. There is a sectarian group. There's a fundamentalist sectarian group that call themselves freedom fighters. And they are fighting a regular army that's comprised of the entire population, and there is a well-balanced representation of the entire community. Now, put it this way. If there was truly an uprising, a secular uprising in Syria, then Syria would not need to import any fighters. Just keep in mind that in Syria you have conscription, and every young man of fighting age, if I can put it this way, is battle ready. So why would they need, if there was really such a great uprising against this terrible sectarian regime, as it is alleged, why would they need to import fighters from Chechnya, from Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, you name it? there would not be a shortage for fighters at all if there was an uprising. The other thing, please let me stop. Please let me finish. When you say something to the effect that people are sick and tired of 40 years of rule of the same family and same legacy, etc., etc., you've got to remember that when Hafiz al-Assad took over something like 40 years ago, not only Syria was reeling from many, many years of political instability because of all the military coups that Bassem told us about earlier, but also because it had very, very weak economic structure. And if it hadn't been for the so-called dictatorship, between inverted commas, and the fact that that man, Hafiz al-Assad, was able to take very, very strict, very strong austerity measures that are focused at nation building, then none of that would have happened. Had been concerned about a re-election, as we have in the West, then he would be concerned about getting re-elected and not worrying about his long-term nation-building program. I think, those 40 years for Syria, 40 years of Assad rule combined, father and son, thus far, has brought political stability, economic progress, nation-building in every whichever way you look at it. So was it a good thing? Of course it was. Would democracy have achieved those same results? Very, very highly unlikely, because you only can see, like in the United States, just one last thing I want to say here now. In the United States, it's often said that the president cannot really do anything about his personal agenda, until his second term in office. Why second term? Because in the second term, he's got no more political aspirations. During the first term, he has to follow the line, and then if there's anything that he wants to do, it will have to wait for the second term. Well, in the case of a benevolent dictatorship, which I believe Syria is, you don't have this problem because the president is not worried about re-election. You want to call it dictatorship, that's fine by me. If it works well, if it brings prosperity, peace, order, and civility.
Right. Bassem, just because I wanted to get you in here, was there something that either Scott or Ghassan mentioned that you wanted to bring up?
Yes, I do actually. The thing is, I think hearing Ghassan talking, I think he has a certain political party in Lebanon, which is one of the few things that we can pride ourselves in Lebanon of having, this different political parties and different political lines that we're allowed to have. I do agree with some of the things and I do disagree with other things. First of all, from what I know, because I, being a vocalist of a Syrian heavy metal band, and oftenly go to Syria to practice, and I'm very well aware of the political situation. I know as well that this whole uprising started with a very, very sectarian slogan. And the sectarian slogan, if I want to translate it to English, it was the Alawites to the grave and the Christians to Beirut. This was one of the major slogans used in the uprising. On a very important note, we have to note that there are many of the Sunnas in Syria. I think they can be counted between 40 and 60% of the Sunnah that supports Assad. And if that wasn't the case, Assad would have fell a long time ago. The fact that he's still holding the power is because there are many of his people are still with him. I personally, on a very personal note, I do not believe that democracy can ever be an answer or a solution to many of the Arab countries, because simply they're not ready for it. And I do agree that this form of dictatorship in Syria is the reason why Syria was able to get out from its political instability and get out from its economical problems. Syria is one of the countries that it was economically very strong, although it has no major, resources like oil. And another thing that happened, that when Bashar al-Assad took the power, he actually started reforming. He did start some reforms, and these are things that you cannot see in a general way. You have to go into certain details. I can give one small example. It was a movie, a Syrian movie called Tahrir, which means the report. It was a Syrian movie made by one of the most famous Syrian actors, and this was an extreme criticism for the regime. And Bashar al-Assad not only allowed it, which was in as far as possible to happen, he even watched the premiere of this movie and encouraged us in Syria to criticize the regime. So it wasn't even 100% dictatorship, but I personally agree it is a dictatorship. And we in Lebanon did suffer from that because we were occupied by Syria for a long time. So things are not black and white, they're extreme gray. And maybe the uprising, when it started by the media, like what happened in Libya. The Libya revolution was all media made. Most of the people in Libya actually supported their leader and were happy the way they were living. It was a big lie that they wanted a revolution, but the revolution happened through media. And this is the same thing that happened in Syria. It happened through media, mainly Al Jazeera, who incited there are a lot of proof of that, because you can go and see of videos that were bombarded to the public opinion, and then many major TV stations like the FA and sometimes even CNN then say, "Oh, sorry, this video was not supposed to be aired because it was actually filmed in Beirut, or in Lebanon during a certain period of time." So it's really a very, very complicated issue. Yes, there is a minority in Syria who wants a democracy, a secular democracy, but that's a really small minority. Most of the other minorities, like the Christians and the Alawites, were living in a very peaceful way with their Sunnis neighbors. But today, after 2 years of this whole thing, it has become extremely sectarian. And I think that was one of the main reasons why this whole uprising started. If you look at Yugoslavia, the same thing happened. You need a civil war in order to change the demography of a certain area. So what I see is the untold aim is for the Christians and Alawites to go to the western borders along the shore, so you can have a Christian Alawite mini-state and a Sunni mini-state and a Kurdish mini-state and a Shia mini-state. As well, I do agree that the Sunni and Shia war between Iran and Saudi Arabia played a major part in this revolution, or if you want to say, because I don't really like revolution, I'd like to call it actually civil war. So yeah, if you want to go into these details, this whole situation is not really simplified. You cannot simplify it. Israel has a role to play, America has a role to play, Iran has a role to play, and Saudi Arabia has a role to play. And they all are contributing in the blood of all the innocent people that are dying. So one final thing I would like to say, supporting the idea that we don't believe that democracy is always the right solution when they're ready for it. You can take Iraq. Iraq was under a very severe dictatorship, but it was thriving, and it was, a country that had all kind of economical levels. You had poor people, you had rich people, you had the middle class, all classes were there. But then when it was, between quotation mark, liberated, the amount of people died from the first American war until Saddam Hussein fell, and until today, are thousandfold than all the atrocities that Saddam Hussein did to people. So there's a main question here: is really democracy always the answer?
Right.
I think that's what I want to say.
Go ahead, Scott.
All right. Well, And let me just say, I agree. I mean, the regional stakeholders. Well, first side note, Israel has stayed very far out of this because they're not sure how this is going to turn out. But the regional stakeholders, besides them, like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, U.S., Qatar, UAE, so on and so forth, I do agree with Ghassan and I believe Bassem that they do want the inevitable destabilization that would come with regime change that would wind up with a Balkanized state, with the Alawites in Latakia and the Sunnis in Aleppo, if they can manage to take it entirely. And that's one thing altogether. We're getting ahead of ourselves. In general, I'd like to address what he was saying with respect to whether certain states are prepared for democracy. What's great about this is not really the point. What I do agree with is, and we're seeing this in Libya, is if you overthrow a regime, particularly in Libya's case, one where the leader had kept everything very decentralized, ruled over everything and left essentially no infrastructure, no rule of law, no foundation at all, you now have less than nothing. So in Syria, point being, if there were to be a total war a total victory by either the rebels or al-Assad's clan, and it is a fact that he's employing Christian and Jewish troops against Sunni protesters in an attempt to drive a wedge between them and minority groups, which very well could backfire. It hasn't yet. But the fact is, if Assad is overthrown, if the rebels do have a total victory, if they do take Damascus, if they do take Aleppo, there would be no rule of law. And this is to say nothing of whether the rebels or whether Assad has actually been committing atrocities on the scale of war crimes or not. I think it's pretty clear that both sides are. I think the point here is a total victory by either side, given what's extant in Syria now, and given the makeup of the country. Democracy, I don't know about impossible, but is entirely improbable and would require the crafting of an entirely new, fundamentally new situation, an infrastructure that would allow for rule. If, at the end, however this ends, there would need to be a transitional government, and the makeup of which is left to be seen. But I do agree with Ghassan that democracy is improbable, but I disagree that it's impossible. I just believe that it would have to happen over a medium to long term, i.e., we're talking generations.
Right. And so I guess, one thing that, someone inside the text chat, posted, and they're discussing the role of the media and how it played into, let's say, escalating this conflict. Ghassan, could you discuss how the media escalated this crisis, and are they not providing, the proper amount of attention to this conflict or the right angle of attention to this conflict because it's so deep? I mean, can you just because over here in the States, you just hear about, 60,000 people being dead, is the media not covering the root cause of where this is all coming from, and what is that root cause?
Well, thanks for the question, Max. And by the way, the audio is getting bad here a little bit. I can barely hear you, but I did hear you nonetheless. But Bassem mentioned earlier that media have been selective in inflaming the situation, and with all due respect, don't take this, please, Max. When I was logging on, I saw something on your page somewhere along the steps of getting into where we are now, saying something about Syria is preparing to use chemical weapons. Of course, referring to the government, referring to the regime. Now, this kind of reporting is very, very irresponsible. And this is the kind of thing that we have been seeing for the last year and a half or so. Not only, as Bassem said, and I haven't got here evidence in front of me or reference that I can send you, but I can do that later on if you wish. We have seen many incidents of killings and uprising taking place in different parts of the world, and telecast on Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, and pretending that these killings have taken place in Syria, and then later on found that in fact this footage is years old, came from Beirut or from Iraq or some other part of the world. So, if anything, the media have been, number one, very, very selective in reporting individual cases, very selective in riding on the bandwagon, like this word chemical weapon, chemical weapon, chemical weapon, chemical weapons. They keep repeating it in a very, very blatant way, and alluding to only one thing, that somebody has to go in, like a major force like NATO or UN-led invasion of Syria to stop this butcher from killing his people. And 60,000, we say 60,000 have been killed in Syria, perhaps more. Who knows? I really don't know if anyone has got the right statistics. But when the 60,000 figure is mentioned, it is often mentioned in the sense that the government is responsible for this whole number in its entirety, which is very, very inaccurate. And all of the so-called massacres, and they are massacres that have taken place here, there, and everywhere, and the army has been made responsible. There's clear evidence that, for example, that the Hula massacre, which really was a turning point in the civil war, was not the work of the government. And now there is a village somewhere in the Arepo district, among other things, a Christian village. I can't think of its name. I think Yaquba or something like that, with 1,000 citizens. They are totally under siege. They have no water. They have no electricity, no food. They are under siege by the militants simply because they are Christians. You do not hear any reports of that. You do not hear any reports of the rebels ransacking ancient, beautiful old churches and turning them into rubble, destroying, some beautiful ancient buildings. I've got some videos, a year-old beheading an army man, or not necessarily perhaps an army man, somebody who's accused of being a shabih, as a pro-government person. A 10-year-old beheading that person. There's a huge level of media blackout to the atrocities of the rebels on one hand, and on the other hand, you have a huge exaggeration of what the army is doing, and at the same time, accusing the army of the atrocities of the rebels. So did the media play a big role? You bet. They played a huge role in inflaming the situation.
I'd like to respond.
Go ahead, Scott.
2 points. One with respect to the media, the second with respect to the chemical weapons issue. I agree, of course. The media has inflamed the issue. Of course, every media source from the West, from the national United Arab Emirates, the Emirati newspaper, to the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, are all, of course, very pro-rebel, very pro-Free Syria army. Not to say that's for better or for worse, but I do agree that regardless, it does cloud the situation even worse than it already is. Second, there was a very big piece in the New York Times uncovering how the Assad regime was in fact moving weaponizable sarin gas through the country, and how a few months ago, and how it was only the forces on the ground, supported by Qatari, Saudi-backed rebel groups and NATO special forces on the ground, purportedly stopped chemical weapons from being put as a payload on weapons that could have been used. I'm not saying that they were going to be. I'm just saying that there is a great deal of evidence to prove that the Assad regime was considering using chemical weapons. It's not speculating about the future. I'm just saying it's fairly highly reported that they were moving things around, and it has to be assumed that if they're moving these things around, they are considering, at least in a last-ditch effort, to use them. Now, I do believe that the whole chemical weapons issue is a red herring. The Obama administration wants absolutely nothing to do with intervention in Syria. If they did, they would have supported Erdogan, Turkish Prime Minister's efforts to rally up NATO, and they would have done a lot more than put Jupiter, i.e. defense anti-tank missiles, on the borders. They would have done a hell of a lot more than that if they actually had any interest. I think it's Obama and other Western leaders' confidence that Assad will not use chemical or biological weapons that has led Obama to use that as his red line, i.e., we will attack the Assad regime if they use chemical weapons. I do not believe that Obama would have made that statement had he believed that Assad truly had an interest in utilizing these chemical weapons. And now, just the last point, I don't want to sound like I'm some entirely anti-regime, spinster here. It seems that both sides have committed atrocities, and I wouldn't put it past disparate groups, particularly Al-Qaeda and groups. And I'm not saying that they're entirely infiltrated by Al-Qaeda, but Al-Qaeda Iraq groups who have learned by fighting U.S. troops between 2003 and 2007, in particular during the Civil War in Iraq. They learned how to fight, and now they've come down to Syria. They flooded the area with weapons, and Jawad al-Nusra, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, and I apologize, but they are a known Al-Qaeda group, and it wouldn't put it past me if they were to get a hold of biological weapons that they would perhaps use them, just like I wouldn't put it past the Assad regime, considering it if their back was against the wall. But at the end of the day, I think the whole situation is a red herring, and I think it's just a way to distract the public from the whole civil war that's going on. And by the way, just last point, it's a civil war, and it's turned into a conventional war of attrition. It has yet to become a genocide because there's just so many different minority groups involved here. But that's just a side note.
Right. Bassem.
Can I respond, Max?
You can definitely respond.
If I respond?
Yeah, I just want to see if Bassem had anything quickly to
Yes.
Throw in there. Is that okay if we just get him in here quickly?
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Bassem.
Actually, it's a bit hard to understand everything is Scott saying because I really have a big problem hearing Scott. It's cutting up for most of the time. Half of what he's saying is not getting to me. The only thing I can give just a small example about the whole media created propaganda is something that happened like a few years ago when Israel bombed what was supposed to be a Syrian chemical factory. Well, it turned out in the end that it was just a building that had any chemical things related. It was a simple building that was being built to become, as I remember, an aspirin factory or something like that. So we cannot really
We're talking about Al-Kibar.
Yeah, I can't hear. Are we talking about
Al-Kibar, the reactor in Al-Kibar in 2007?
Max, can you say what Scott's saying to hear him?
Yeah, he's asking, are you referring to Al-Kibar?
In 2007, the reactor that the Israelis hit that's widely agreed upon to have been a nuclear reactor?
Did you hear that, Bassem?
The one in the southern Syria.
Yeah, in 2007. That was supposed to be a nuclear reactor. That's what he just asked.
Yeah, yes. Yes.
I didn't think that was in dispute that was a nuclear reactor.
Sorry, say again?
He said he didn't think that was in dispute, whether or not it was a nuclear reactor, what you're referring to. Was it in dispute?
He's saying that was not in dispute? I'm not getting...
Yes.
As in there was... I thought it was widely agreed upon that the nuclear installation in Al-Kibar, or the building in Al-Kibar that was hit by the Israelis in 2007 was widely accepted to have been a nuclear reactor, and that is why particularly Sunni regimes quietly supported the action.
Yes, but that's the problem. There are many things that are widely accepted and agreed upon that were actually not true, and this is why I said it's a very gray area, because in the end there is an opinion that not everything that happens is done without the knowledge of the Syrian regime in the area when it comes to Syria, the Israeli and Arab. So what happened right after the bombing, that the footages were at least we saw it in Lebanon. I don't know about the rest of the world, because they did actually take a footage of the site after it was bombed, and it was very clear that it was not a nuclear establishment. So the thing is that whether these things are true or not is something very hard to know, and I tend to believe that it's mostly fabricated. Now, I agree with you that Assad will, that the West is confident that Assad will not use the chemical weapons against these people. I mean, it's not even a clever move, and that's one people tends to ignore. When we talk about a regime as big as Assad regime, you have to really understand it's not a really stupid regime, and they do take their public opinion into consideration. So they cannot simply just go and do something that would put a kind of a nail in their coffin.
They're also very.
Nonetheless, this whole chemical weapon is being played as a public opinion pressure through media and through propaganda, regardless of how true would that be. So that is just another example of how the public opinion is being shaped. And how people around Syria are being led to believe certain things just to make it okay for many things that are being covered up. So, like one of the main things that you would never see in media, that there is a big part of the Syrian population before in the first year of the rebels attack, the first year. Even more than 70% of the population were supporting Assad regime. Today, you could see that it dropped either to 50 or 40%. So the media is actually affecting even the public opinion in Syria, and that is dangerous. And that is how, in my opinion, wars are always been controlled by the major powers who are playing this whole war, because it's not a Syrian war. By sense, it's a global war that's being fought on Syrian ground, and we had a very thing during the civil war in Lebanon. We had a regional problem that was being solved on the Lebanese soil, and that is one thing. When people go and say, like, do you think that all the lives are worth Bashar Assad staying in the power? I would ask the people, all the bloodshed is worth the fact that this whole war is not actually related to neither democracy nor the people's will, but actually the will of the countries that are the major players. Because in the end, whether it was the Syrian regime or the rebel, at a certain point when you see what's going on, you feel that it's simple pawns in a bigger game, and that is the ugliest fact of war.
I think we can all agree that this is very much a proxy war between Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the West, you name it, and Russia, Syria, Iran, Hezbollah, so on.
Right.
It's very good that you turned off your video, because I can hear you much better now.
Okay.
So here, guys, here's what I just wanted to share with each of you. Ghassan, I know that you said that you wanted to come in with a comment. So we'd be happy to hear that comment. What I need to share with each of you is that in a few minutes, about 5 minutes, I actually have to run, and I have some other Vonvo things that I need to attend to. So what I was going to share with you is that we do still have a bunch of people inside the room that are listening to you speak and are interested and engaged in your conversation. I'm going to continue the recording on another computer that I have here, and after I leave, feel free to continue the discussion, and I would love, for our viewers to maybe hear a little bit about solutions and what you think are the best approaches forward. So as soon as I leave here, the recording will still be going on. And I just I want to just thank you now before Ghassan continues his point. For joining me here today and informing our audience and everyone. Okay.
Well, thank you, Max. Perhaps we wrap it up because we have it for an hour. Probably enough is enough. And this will probably be my closing statement here. Look, I don't see there is any solution that can be based on negotiations, sadly, because the fundamentalists are the kind of people that you cannot truly negotiate with. I'm not saying kill them all, but they have to be stopped. They have to be uprooted. You cannot reach a compromise between secularism and sectarianism. You just cannot do that. There's no such thing. It's impossible. But back to this very quickly, to this chemical weapon issue. If indeed those weapons have been moved around, as Scott said, and this is why Obama mentioned them, otherwise he wouldn't, it's likely that the government has moved them to safer locations where the rebels cannot get them. And we have heard Colin Powell years ago uttering nonsense in the United Nations when he was talking about the Iraqi weapons of mass destruction. So there is perhaps, what shall I say, a pattern of behavior, the American administration saying things that are not true. And the normal scenario would be for the media and the opposition to keep beating up a drum, and then something will happen and they will go and accuse the government of doing it. If chemical weapons are at all to be used in Syria, my guess is that they're going to be used by the rebels and the government is going to be accused. And as for the USA would have done something about this if they really felt there was a need and the time has come to do it, it's not because Syria has not used chemical weapons yet. It's simply because the United States and all of the anti-Syrian alliance finds itself in a deep quagmire. It doesn't know how to get out of it. They are totally unable to. Because if they want to take this bigger, if they want to go step and attack Syria like they attacked Iraq, this is going to be very, very big. It will include Turkey, it will include Iran, it will include Saudi Arabia. God knows how far this thing can go. And they are probably doing the wise thing here, if they have any wisdom at all, of staying out of it as much as they can, that is, because they thought initially that this whole thing could perhaps, end up in a few weeks, couple of months at the most, and it didn't work. Their plans did not work, and now they know what to do. And at the end of the day, there will be no negotiations. Syria will come out victorious, Assad will come out victorious, and it will be up to his people to decide if they want to re-elect him or not. Thank you.
I just want to say, and also, I agree. I believe it would be the rebels who would be more likely to use the biological weapons. And it's also worth noting that biological weapons are extremely bad in the sense that they're ineffective. They're very, very hard to control. They can spray back in your face. They're not useful weapons, which is one of the large reasons why they are banned by the Geneva Convention to begin with. They're not useful, is what I mean.
Great. And Bassem, did you have any closing remarks or?
There's about the solution. I kind of agree with Ghassan that there is no really any solution that is available right now. I just want to convey the idea of few of my Syrian friends who are both actually Christians and who both do not actually agree on the same thing. But what they do agree upon is the fact that today, because there's a difference between today and when the whole thing started. I think that's Mark Scott said that Israel today is not actually doesn't have a stand on what's going on because they don't know what is it going to lead to, which is true today. But at the beginning of the rebel, actually Israel did have a stand. So things changed because nobody expected this whole thing to drag so long. So what is the solution today is really difficult to know, because first of all, the rebels among themselves are not at all in total coordination. They are divided among themselves between the secular revolution, between the sectarian revolution, between the fundamentalists, between those who just want democracy and those who want an actual Islamic rule that goes back to the Khilafah. You know, so all of these things are really in play there. You have a divided rebel forces, they're not even okay with themselves. And I think that later on, if this conflict drags for more years, that these rebel forces will fight among themselves. And the other hand, you have a regime that represents the state, regardless of how is it dictatorship, how tyrant this regime is. Actually, this regime is tyrant when it comes to political freedom. But in all other manners of life, Syria was the only country where I would not care what my religion was, neither would the police. So you have all these things in play. There's the image of the state. If Tal As falls today, what guarantee does anyone, even a democratic president, would have? What chance would we have to stay in power, overthrown, because there's this image of the weak state? All of these are in play. Any solution up ahead? Not at all. What I think is going to happen probably is this whole Syria. Either it was held on for a few more years with a lot of bloodshed, and then the Western and the Syrians and the Syrian regime agree on something, or the whole country is going to be divided into small sectarian states, which, by the way, to take it more into a philosophical sense, which suits Israel. The only person that could benefit from this is Israel, because Israel is a state based on religion. It's a sectarian. It's not really secular. It's a sectarian state. It's the home of the Jews. It would be logical, and it would kind of approve its existence through having a Shia state and a Kurdish state and a Christian state and Alawite state, and so. But the result of this is going probably to be devastating to the area. Hopefully, I mean, this is a far-fetched wish, but I hope this whole thing ends soon. I don't see that happening. And I don't see any practical solution except the end of the term of Assad, of Bashar al-Assad, and new elections without the presence of the guns in the streets.
Ghassan, this is Scott. I think that on that last point is the one that we most agree, which is that unfortunately, whatever many of the regional powers want, and what I think is the most likely to happen, is that the country gets broken down along factionalized lines. I do disagree that only Israel has the benefit. I think Israel would be remiss not to be more comfortable with a less powerful Syria on its northeastern border, but beyond that, I don't think that they have this inner wish for the country to be entirely divided. I just think
I need to point out it's not their wish. I said it would suit them the most, but that doesn't mean it's their wish.
Yeah, I know. I figured. I just wanted to clarify. But to your point, yeah, I agree that the most likely situation is that the best situation, and I honestly think this will have to just take care of itself, and this will drag on, and nothing good will come from it. But in the end of the day, the most likely situation is a Balkanization of the country, or a Lebanonization of the country. I hazard to use that term with you guys, but you know what I mean, which i.e. the breakdown of the country along sectarian lines. And unfortunately, I don't think that would really suit anyone, but at the same time, it is in many countries' interest, particularly the Sunnis and the Sunni nations that have allied with the West in this regard, because of the fact that it would take away the Russians' last base in the Middle East, i.e. in Tartus, Syria, and it would weaken Iran. So I think the West would be remiss not to stay out of this and hope for Assad to agree to a negotiated withdrawal. Whether that's the best thing for the country or not remains to be seen, but I think that's really the only semi-positive end game here.
Great. So, Ghassan, Bassem, and Scott, I wanted to thank you for, participating in, this Vonvo on Syria. We're looking to, push this topic a lot further and give it some, more objective exposure. So, it was great having you guys on. You were each, awesome, and, we hope to have you back real soon, okay?
Thank you, Max.
Thank you for the opportunity, Max.
Great. Speak
It's
to you.
nice meeting you guys.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you too.
Have a good day.